It started with a simple act of human kindness on a miserable rain-soaked night in downtown Seattle. She offered a shivering stranger her only umbrella, completely unaware she had just bound her soul to an ancient, bloodthirsty king, a monster who would tear the city apart to claim her. The rain in Seattle did not fall. It oppressed. It was a relentless freezing deluge that soaked through wool coats and chilled the bones. Clara Hayes, a 24-year-old archivist, working at the prestigious and dust-choked Oak Haven Antiquarian Books, pushed the heavy oak doors of the shop shut, her fingers numb against the brass locks. It was nearly 11 at night. The streets of Pioneer Square were utterly deserted, the cobblestones slick and reflecting the sickly amber glow of the street lamps. Clara sighed, pulling the collar of her trench coat tighter around her neck, and popped open her cheap black nylon umbrella. It was flimsy, already missing a spoke, but it was her only defense against the storm. She began the 4-block trek to the bus stop, her boots splashing through deep puddles. The city felt eerily quiet, the usual hum of traffic, muffled by the torrential downpour. As she turned the corner onto Yesler Way, a flash of lightning illuminated the alleyway to her right. Standing perfectly still in the shadows, entirely unprotected from the biting rain, was a man. Clara stopped her heart, doing a nervous stutter in her chest. The man was not seeking shelter. He stood with his hands resting casually in the pockets of an impeccably tailored charcoal grey suit. He wore no overcoat. The freezing rain plastered his dark hair to his forehead and soaked through his expensive clothes, yet he didn't shiver. He merely stared out into the street, his posture rigid and impossibly regal. Against her better judgment, Clara took a step closer. The amber light caught his features and her breath hitched. He possessed a terrifying, sharp beauty, a jawline carved from marble-high cheekbones, and skin so pale it seemed to possess its own cold luminescence. But it was his eyes that locked her in place. They were a piercing metallic silver grey, completely unblinking. "Excuse me," Clara called out, her voice trembling slightly over the roar of the rain. "Are you all right? You're going to freeze to death out here." The man turned his head slowly. The movement was smooth, almost predatory. "Death and I are old acquaintances, miss," he replied. His voice was a deep, resonant baritone that sent a strange electric shiver down her spine. It didn't hold a trace of a Seattle accent. It was aristocratic, carrying the faint lilt of a bygone European era. "Well, your old acquaintance is going to catch you tonight if you don't get out of this weather," Clara said, stepping closer. Pity overriding her self-preservation, she held out her damaged black umbrella. "Here, take it. I only have a few blocks to the bus stop. I can run." The man looked at the cheap plastic handle, then up at Clara's face. For a fraction of a second, an expression of profound confusion crossed his striking features. It was as if no one had offered him anything in centuries. "You would sacrifice your own comfort for a stranger?" he asked softly. "It's just an umbrella," Clara insisted, thrusting it toward him. "Take it before I change my mind." Slowly he reached out. As his fingers brushed hers, Clara gasped. His skin was not just cold, it was freezing, like touching a block of solid ice. A jolt of static electricity snapped between them, sharp and stinging. He took the handle, his silver eyes burning into hers. "You are incredibly foolish, Clara Hayes," he murmured. Clara froze. "How do you know my name?" He didn't answer. He simply stepped back into the deeper shadows of the alley. "I will not forget this," he whispered, and before Clara could blink, the darkness seemed to swallow him whole. Clara ran the rest of the way to the bus stop, arriving drenched to the bone, her mind racing with the impossibility of the encounter. How had he known her name? She didn't wear a name tag. The next morning, the strangeness of the night before was overshadowed by grim reality. Clara sat in the cramped kitchen of her apartment, a towel wrapped around her wet hair, sipping cheap coffee, while her roommate Beatrice Sullivan angrily jabbed at the television remote. "They found another one," Beatrice said, her voice tight with anxiety. "That's the third one this month." Clara looked up at the local news broadcast. Detective Ryan Willis, a seasoned investigator with deep bags under his eyes, was giving a press conference outside a cordoned-off warehouse near the docks. "We are asking the public to remain vigilant," Detective Willis stated grimly. "The victim was found early this morning. Like the others, the cause of death is highly unusual. We are dealing with a serial offender." The news anchor chimed in her tone, sensationalized. Sources close to the investigation, dubbed the Pioneer Square drainings, confirm that the victims were found completely exsanguinated, drained of all blood with no defensive wounds. A cold dread coiled in Clara's stomach. She thought of the pale man in the rain, his freezing touch, his metallic eyes. She shook her head, forcing the absurd thought away. Vampires were Hollywood fiction, not Seattle reality. When Clara arrived at the bookstore later that afternoon, a sleek black delivery box was waiting on the front counter. Her boss mentioned a private courier in a luxury sedan had dropped it off. Clara untied the black silk ribbon with trembling fingers. Inside, nestled in crushed velvet, was an umbrella. It was a masterpiece of antique craftsmanship. The canopy was made of heavy waterproofed black silk, and the shaft was polished ebony. But the handle was what stole her breath. It was cast in heavy sterling silver, sculpted into the shape of a regal, imposing wolf's head. Tucked beneath the silver handle was a thick, cream-colored card with elegant, handwritten calligraphy, a temporary shield against the storm. "Thank you for your warmth, Nathaniel Croft." For 3 days, Clara Hayes left the antique umbrella locked in her apartment closet, terrified of what it represented. She scoured the internet for the name Nathaniel Croft. She found nothing on social media, no LinkedIn profiles, no business directories. The only mention of a Nathaniel Croft in the Pacific Northwest was in a scanned historical registry from 1892, listing a prominent British industrialist who had perished in a mysterious fire. It had to be a coincidence, but the feeling of being watched never left her. It was a heavy, prickling sensation at the base of her neck. When she walked down the street, she caught fleeting glimpses of dark luxury sedans with tinted windows slowing down at intersections. When she looked out her apartment window, the shadows in the courtyard seemed to stretch and linger unnaturally. On Thursday night, Clara was forced to work late again to finalize an appraisal for a massive estate collection. By the time she locked the bookstore, the rain had returned a light, persistent drizzle that cast a misty haze over the streetlights. Reluctantly, she had brought the silver wolf umbrella with her. As she opened the heavy black silk canopy, it opened with a muted, expensive snap. She began her walk home, avoiding the dark alleys of Pioneer Square, sticking to the main thoroughfares. But as she crossed onto 2nd Avenue, the streetlights began to flicker and die one by one, plunging the block into darkness. Clara quickened her pace, the heels of her boots clicking loudly against the concrete. Click, clack. From behind her, another set of footsteps echoed her own. Scuff, drag. She stopped. The footsteps behind her stopped. Clara swallowed hard, gripping the silver handle of the umbrella like a weapon. She forced herself to keep walking, turning sharply down a narrow cross street that led toward a busy avenue. Suddenly, a figure dropped from the fire escape above, landing with a heavy, wet thud directly in her path. Clara screamed, stumbling backward and dropping the umbrella. The man standing before her was a nightmare. He wore a filthy, torn jacket. His skin was a mottled, sickly grey, and his eyes were completely dilated, rendering them pools of black pitch. But it was his mouth that froze Clara in terror. His jaw was unhinged slightly, revealing rows of jagged, elongated teeth stained with dried, dark rust. He hissed a guttural wet sound that vibrated in his chest and lunged. He moved with an impossible jerky speed. Clara threw her hands up, bracing for the impact, squeezing her eyes shut. But the impact never came. Instead, a rush of freezing air swept past her, carrying the scent of rain ozone and expensive cologne. A deafening, sickening crack shattered the quiet street. Clara opened her eyes. Nathaniel Croft stood 3 feet in front of her. His hand was clamped around the throat of the monstrous creature, lifting the grey-skinned man effortlessly off the ground. The creature thrashed wildly its clawed hands, tearing at Nathaniel's dark coat, but Nathaniel didn't even flinch. His silver eyes were ablaze, radiating a terrifying, ancient fury. "You dare hunt in my territory!" Nathaniel's voice was barely a whisper, but it echoed off the brick walls with the force of a thunderclap. "You dare approach what is marked as mine." The creature let out a whimpering, pathetic squeal. With a casual, almost bored flick of his wrist, Nathaniel snapped the creature's neck. The sound was like a thick tree branch breaking in half. He tossed the lifeless body into the nearby dumpster, where it landed with a heavy thud. Nathaniel slowly reached into his pocket, pulled out a pristine white handkerchief, and wiped his hands. He turned to face Clara. She was pressed flat against the brick wall, hyperventilating her knees, shaking so violently she could barely stand. He took a step toward her. "Do not fear me." "Clara," he said, his voice softening the terrifying aura of power, receding just enough to let her breathe. "What are you?" She choked out, tears of absolute panic spilling down her cheeks. What was that thing? Nathaniel stooped down and elegantly retrieved her fallen umbrella. He closed it and held it out to her. That was a feral, a mistake of my kind who could not control his hunger. As for me, he looked down at her, his silver eyes tracing the frantic pulse beating at the base of her throat. "I am Nathaniel Croft. I am the sovereign of a dying breed. And you, in your fragile, foolish kindness, last week decided to pity a king. A king of what?" Clara whispered, though the horrifying truth was already taking root in her mind. Exsanguinated bodies, impossible speed, cold skin. "Of the night," Nathaniel answered simply. "By offering me your umbrella, you offered me a kindness unprompted. In my world that creates a blood debt, it marked you. I have had my guards watching you ever since, but tonight this feral slipped through the perimeter." He stepped closer, towering over her. "You're under my protection now, Clara. No shadow in this city will touch you without answering to me." He escorted her the rest of the way to her apartment in total silence. The sheer, overwhelming dominance of his presence kept Clara mute. When she reached her door, she fumbled with her keys. She turned to look at him, but the hallway was empty. He had vanished without a sound. Clara barely slept. She locked her door, barricaded it with a chair, and sat on her bed, clutching the silver wolf umbrella, until dawn broke. At 8 a.m., a sharp, authoritative pounding rattled her front door. Clara jumped, her heart hammering. "Beatrice!" she called out, but her roommate had already left for her nursing shift. Clara crept to the door and looked through the peephole. Standing in the hallway was Detective Ryan Willis. He looked exhausted, holding a leather notepad. Reluctantly, Clara undid the locks and opened the door a crack. "Can I help you, Detective?" Willis flashed his badge. "Clara Hayes, I need to ask you a few questions. We found a body in a dumpster off 2nd Avenue early this morning. A homeless man." Neck snapped. Willis pulled a printed grainy photograph from his pocket and held it up. It was a still from a nearby ATM security camera. It showed Clara, clearly identifiable, walking away from the alley, and walking right beside her, shrouded in shadow but unmistakably imposing, was Nathaniel. "Miss Hayes," Detective Willis said, his eyes narrowing, assessing her pale, terrified face. "Who is the man walking with you? And why was he seen leaving the scene of a murder?" Clara stared at the grainy photograph in Detective Willis's hand, her mind scrambling for a lifeline. The black and white image captured the imposing silhouette of Nathaniel perfectly, though his face was mercifully obscured by the angle of the street lamp. The chilling memory of the feral creature's neck snapping echoed in her ears. "I don't know his name," Clara lied, her voice remarkably steady, despite the frantic beating of her heart. She wrapped her cardigan tighter around her shoulders, leaning against the doorframe to hide her trembling knees. The streetlights went out. I was terrified. That man saw me walking alone and offered to escort me to my street. He was just a good Samaritan. Detective Willis narrowed his eyes, studying her face with the practiced scrutiny of a man who had heard 1,000 lies. "A good Samaritan," he repeated flatly. "Miss Hayes, this city is on edge. Mayor Bruce Harrell has been breathing down the precinct's neck all morning, demanding answers for the bodies piling up in Pioneer Square. We have 3 exsanguinated victims, and now a homeless man with his cervical spine pulverized. If your good Samaritan knows something about this, withholding his identity makes you an accessory." "I told you," Clara insisted, forcing a look of indignant exhaustion. "He walked me to my door and left. I didn't see any murder. I didn't see anyone else. If you have nothing else, Detective, I have a shift at the archive." Willis snapped his notebook shut, the sharp sound making her flinch. "Don't leave the city, Miss Hayes. If you remember anything, call me." He handed her a card and turned away, his heavy footsteps echoing down the linoleum hallway. Clara locked the door, sliding down the wood until she hit the floor, burying her face in her hands. She was protecting a monster. She had lied to the police for a creature that drank human blood, yet the memory of Nathaniel's silver eyes, the way he had stepped between her and certain death, anchored her loyalty to him in a way she could not rationally explain. When Clara left her apartment building, 2 hours later, the typical Seattle drizzle had resumed. A sleek midnight blue Bentley was idling directly in front of her building, its engine a low, powerful purr. The passenger door opened, and a tall, severely dressed woman with bone-white hair stepped out. Her eyes were a striking, unnatural shade of violet. "Miss Hayes," the woman said, her voice devoid of inflection. "My name is Genevieve. Lord Croft requests your presence immediately. It concerns your safety." Clara hesitated, gripping the strap of her satchel. "And if I refuse, the police are not equipped to protect you from what hunts in the shadows," Genevieve replied smoothly. "Get in the car, Clara." With a deep breath, Clara slid into the plush leather interior. The windows were heavily tinted, blocking out the grey morning light. They drove in total silence, weaving through downtown traffic until they reached an exclusive gated high-rise complex in the upscale neighborhood of Broadmoor. The Bentley bypassed the main lobby, entirely descending into a private, subterranean garage where a private elevator awaited. When the elevator doors opened, Clara stepped into a sprawling, breathtaking penthouse that commanded a panoramic view of the Puget Sound. The decor was a jarring mix of stark modern minimalism and priceless antiquities. Ancient tapestries hung next to floor-to-ceiling glass windows, and medieval weaponry was displayed in illuminated glass cases. Standing by the window, gazing out at the fog rolling over the water, was Nathaniel. He wore a crisp white dress shirt with the sleeves rolled up, revealing pale, muscular forearms. He turned as she entered, his silver eyes softening imperceptibly. "Leave us, Genevieve," Nathaniel commanded softly. The white-haired woman bowed her head and vanished into the corridors of the penthouse. "You lied to the authorities for me," Nathaniel said, closing the distance between them. He stopped just a few feet away, close enough for Clara to feel the unnatural radiating cold from his skin. "Why?" "Because I saw what was going to kill me in that alley," Clara whispered, looking up into his haunting face. and I saw you stop it. But I need to know the truth. What is happening in this city?" Nathaniel sighed a heavy, ancient sound and gestured to a velvet armchair. Once Clara sat, he began to pace. "My kind has existed alongside yours for millennia. We survive by blending in, by adhering to strict laws of secrecy and restraint. For 3 centuries, I have ruled the Pacific Northwest Territory, ensuring peace. We take only what is freely given or what will not be missed. We do not leave bodies in the streets." He stopped, his jaw tightening. "But a rebellion is brewing, a faction led by a vampire named Valerius. He believes the old ways are weak. He wants to drag us out of the shadows to subjugate humanity rather than hide from it. The exsanguinated victims you saw on the news, those were Valerius's doing. A deliberate taunt. He is creating an army of newly turned ravenous vampires, ferals, to overwhelm my forces." Clara gripped the armrests of her chair, her knuckles turning white, "And the creature that attacked me." "Because of the umbrella," Nathaniel said, softly kneeling before her chair so they were at eye level. "When you offered me a kindness, your scent became interwoven with mine. In our world, a king's protection is an absolute decree. Valerius sent that feral to kill you, not because he wanted your blood, but because he wanted to send me a message. He wanted to prove that a king who cannot protect his human pet cannot protect an empire." Clara bristled at the word. "I am no one's pet." A ghost of a smile touched Nathaniel's lips, revealing the subtle, sharp points of his fangs. "No, you are far braver than that. But as long as my scent is on you, Valerius will hunt you to get to me. You must stay here, Clara. Within these walls you are safe. I have a life, Nathaniel. I have a job, a roommate. I can't just vanish into a Gothic penthouse. Your life as you knew it ended the moment you handed me that umbrella in the rain." He replied, his voice laced with genuine sorrow. He reached out his icy fingers, gently brushing a stray lock of hair behind her ear. The touch sent a cascade of electricity down her spine. "I did not want to drag you into this war, Clara. But now that you are here, I will burn this city to ash before I let them touch you." For 2 weeks, Clara remained sequestered in Nathaniel's fortress in the sky. To her surprise, her captivity felt less like a prison and more like a sanctuary. She spent her days exploring his vast, centuries-old library, while Nathaniel spent the nights orchestrating a shadow war across the city. She learned the terrifying reality of his existence, but she also saw the heavy burden of his crown. There were moments of quiet intimacy, late-night conversations over antique maps, shared silences, while the rain battered the glass and the undeniable magnetic pull that drew them closer each evening. But outside the reinforced glass of the penthouse at Seattle was bleeding. The news reported a spike in animal attacks and mysterious disappearances. Valerius was growing bolder. The storm broke on a Tuesday night. Clara was reading by the fireplace, while Nathaniel stood over a sprawling tactical map of the city, conferring in hushed tones with Genevieve and 2 other imposing vampires of his inner guard. Suddenly, the atmospheric pressure in the room dropped so rapidly, Clara's ears popped. The ambient lighting flickered violently and died. "They breached the wards," Genevieve hissed, drawing a long, gleaming silver blade from beneath her coat. "Defend the perimeter," Nathaniel roared, his eyes flashing to a blinding liquid silver. His fangs fully descended his aristocratic features, twisting into a mask of pure, predatory wrath. He turned to Clara, moving so fast he was merely a blur, and shoved her behind the heavy mahogany desk. "Do not move from this spot!" The floor-to-ceiling windows shattered inward with an explosive crash. Shards of glass rained down like diamonds as a dozen figures leapt into the room from the night sky. The ferals. They were monstrous, feral things, their faces distorted by eternal hunger. Behind them, stepping through the broken glass with the casual arrogance of a conqueror, was Valerius. He was tall, clad in crimson leather, with eyes as black as crude oil, and a cruel, jagged smile. Nathaniel. Valerius mocked his voice, echoing over the howling wind blowing into the penthouse. Look at how far the mighty king has fallen. Hiding in a glass tower with his human toy, the room erupted into a blur of supernatural violence. Genevieve and the guards clashed with the ferals moving faster than Clara's eyes could track. The air was filled with the sickening sounds of tearing flesh breaking bones and guttural snarls. Nathaniel launched himself at Valerius. The impact shook the foundation of the building. The two ancient vampires tore through the furniture, their fists moving with the force of freight trains. Valerius was fueled by the fresh, stolen blood of 100 innocent victims, granting him a frenzied strength that pushed Nathaniel back. From her hiding spot, Clara watched in paralyzed horror as a feral slipped past the guards. It locked its milky, dilated eyes on her and hissed, dropping to all fours to crawl over the desk. Clara scrambled backward, her hands desperately searching the floor. Her fingers brushed cold metal. The umbrella. Nathaniel had brought the silver wolf-headed umbrella from her apartment. The feral lunged its jaw unhinging to expose rows of razor-sharp teeth. Clara screamed, driving the umbrella forward like a spear. The heavy, sterling silver wolf's head smashed directly into the creature's chest, right over its heart. The silver burned through its skin with a sickening hiss of smoke. The feral shrieked in agony, thrashing backward, before collapsing into a pile of grey ash on the expensive rug. A sudden deafening roar drew her attention back to the center of the room. Valerius had managed to drive a fractured piece of the mahogany desk deep into Nathaniel's side. Black blood spilled down the king's white shirt as he fell to one knee. "You are weak, Croft," Valerius spat, raising a silver blade to deliver the killing blow. "Your obsession with humanity has poisoned you." Clara didn't think. She acted on pure adrenaline and desperation. She hurled the heavy antique umbrella across the room with all her might. It struck Valerius squarely in the back of the head. It wasn't a fatal blow, but the sudden impact of the heavy silver distracted him for a crucial fraction of a second. He turned his head, snarling at Clara. In that split second, Nathaniel's eyes flared with an inferno of rage. He surged upward, grabbing Valerius by the throat. With a terrifying display of raw ancient power, Nathaniel lifted the rebel leader into the air and drove his hand straight through Valerius's chest. Valerius's eyes widened in shock as Nathaniel crushed his heart. Valerius's body withered instantly, turning to dust that blew away in the wind, howling through the shattered windows. Seeing their leader destroyed, the remaining ferals turned and fled into the night. The penthouse fell into a heavy, gasping silence. Genevieve and the guards melted into the shadows, leaving the room to their king. Nathaniel remained on his knees, clutching his bleeding side. Clara ran to him, falling beside him on the ruined floor, her hands hovering over his wound. "You're hurt," she cried, tears blurring her vision. "Nathaniel, you're bleeding." "It will heal." He gasped, his skin paler than usual. He looked up at her, his expression a mix of awe and terror. "You fought back. You saved my life. You saved mine first," she whispered, cupping his cold face in her warm hands. Nathaniel leaned into her touch, closing his eyes. "This world is a graveyard, Clara. It is violence and shadows and endless night. You should run from me. I give you permission to run." Clara looked at the blood on his shirt, at the ruined luxury of his home, and then into the bottomless silver of his eyes. She leaned in, pressing her lips against his cold, blood-stained mouth. The kiss was desperate electric, a collision of life and immortality that sent a shockwave through her very soul. When she pulled back, she rested her forehead against his. "I gave you my umbrella in the rain," she whispered fiercely. "I'm not leaving you in the storm." Clara Hayes traded the mundane sunlight of Seattle for a crown of shadows standing beside Nathaniel, not as a human pet, but as the fiercely devoted queen of the night. Together they ruled the city's underground, bound by blood battle and an unbreakable love that began with a single selfless act in the pouring rain. If you were captivated by this dark vampire romance, hit that like button, share this story with your fellow fantasy lovers, and don't forget to subscribe to our video channel for more thrilling paranormal tales every week.